Hi, and welcome back to Programming with Pax. In today's video, we're going to take a deep dive on HTML. We'll start by talking about what HTML is, and then after that, we're going to go over all of the different element tags and what they do. This video is for somebody that's just starting off, and as such, there will be no CSS or JavaScript. By the end of this video, you should be confident enough to start writing HTML for whatever your next project is. Let's get started. Before we dig into the code, let's take a look at some of the fundamentals of HTML. First, what is HTML? It stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It is one of several types of markup languages. HTML is the content of the page, so it is the text and the structure. It is not the styling or the logic. That is CSS and JavaScript, respectively. It's also not a programming language. There is no logic to it, like in JavaScript. It is just a markup language. And a little history, it originally came out in 1993, and the 5th edition, HTML5, was released in 2014. HTML is made up of tags, also known as elements. So each tag has a specific purpose. An element will start with an opening tag and also will have a closing tag, just like this. So the opening tag will have a less than and a greater than symbol around the keyword, and then some content in the middle, and then the closing tag will have a less than and also a / just before it. This signifies the closing tag. So this word tag here is just to demonstrate the pattern. It's not actually an HTML tag. The next example is, however. So same format. I'm trying to show you the pattern here. So you've got button here, which is the opening tag, and then some content, some words, something that you're going to see on screen. So if it's a button that says buy now, the text would go right in the middle here. And then at the end, you have a closing tag. And again, it has the / right at the end, just like in the first example. Most tags have an opening and a closing tag. However, some are self-closing, meaning they don't have a closing tag which acts as a container. So in this one, this is an image tag, and you're just going to have that / that you have usually in the closing tag. You're just going to have that at the end. Do not worry about memorizing which elements have opening and closing tags and which are self-closing. So in most modern code editors, such as VS Code, we can type a tag, and we'll press tab, and it will autocomplete and create the element for us. So this does a lot of the dirty work for us, and in time and with practice, you'll just start to remember which tags do what and how they look. Also notice that in all of these tags, it's always lowercase. You'll never have uppercase. It's never going to be written uppercase, button, all capitals. Now with HTML elements, there is an order that needs to happen with the tags. So notice here how the first tag, the parent, is a div, and then within there's a button, but when the closing tags happen, the div comes before the button. This is not correct. They need to line up correctly. So an example of the correct way of doing it would be that the button closes the button, and then the div properly closes the div. So order does matter. HTML elements can have something called attributes. So an attribute is a modifier. It either modifies the functionality of an element, or it provides functionality to an element that wouldn't be able to function properly without it. It's essentially a way of giving the element information. So just like before, I've written it out to simply show you the pattern here. So again, tag is not an actual valid HTML tag. It's just for example here. So we have an opening tag right here, and the closing tag right here with an attribute equal to some value. So an actual example of this would be a button. So here's the opening one, same pattern, with a type attribute, and submit would be the value that's given to it. And here's the closing tag for the button. And with self-closing tags, the attribute just simply goes right within it. So in this example, the image will need a source attribute, and it's equal to the name of a file. So this is actually the file name that you're giving to the image tag, and you're telling it that this is what it should display. Another concept you need to be familiar with is inline versus block level elements. So on the left-hand side, we have an inline example, and on the right is what block elements would do. So with inline, an inline element will flow from one line to the next, and the element itself will only take up the width that it requires. Block elements, however, will start a new line and will take up the full available width. And with both of them beside each other, I have color-coded it so you can sort of see what the element would do. If this green element was set from inline to block, then it would take up this full space and it would push this yellow element to the second line. And here's an example of that. So you can see that the red element is a block level element, and it's going to push all the way to the end and take up its full width, and therefore pushing any of the green inline elements to the next line. Before we can start writing HTML tags with all of our content, we first need to create a proper container or a structure for all of our HTML to go within. My hope is that if I show you the structure without code, then you'll be able to understand it a bit better, and you'll be able to recognize and understand the pattern and what's going on when you see it in code. So to start the boilerplate container off, we first need a doc type tag. This doc type will say what type of markup language is being used, and in this case, HTML. From there, we create an HTML tag. This HTML tag is the root element of the page. Now, inside of the HTML tags, we need two other tags, the head and the body. The HTML tag is the parent to the head and the body, and the head and the body are siblings, since they are on the same level. When a tag is nested inside of another tag, by convention, we push it forward a bit. This helps with readability and can be done by pressing tab at the start of the nested line. The head tag contains meta information of the website, including the title, which is displayed in the browser tab, imported fonts, as well as search engine optimization information, which helps rank your website in Google. It's essentially all of the things about the website that we don't directly see. The body, on the other hand, handles all of the content we do see. As a quick side note, the content that's within the head tag will be read by the browser first, and then the content within the body tag will be read. Because things work in that order, we can put our style sheets in the head tag and our JavaScript tags at the end of the body tag. This allows the browser to start loading all of the styling, like the color and positioning, immediately, so that as the content appears on the page, it is already mostly styled. Your JavaScript files can sometimes take a little longer to load, and so we put them at the bottom of the body tag so that everything else is loaded first. This leads to a better user experience where the user can see the complete website quickly, while also allowing an extra few seconds behind the scenes for the JavaScript file to load. Alright, I'm in VS Code now. If you're interested in seeing a tutorial on getting started with VS Code and great productivity plugins for it, I recently made a video on that, and it's available here. And I'll also leave it in the description down below. I will be using a plugin called Live Server, which allows for hot reloading. This means that when I save the code editor, it will automatically refresh and update the browser. First, I'm going to create a folder for us to work within. So let's just call this HTML Crash Course. And we're going to open it. Next, I'm going to create an HTML file. By convention, we call this index.html because when we load our website to a server, the server will first look for an HTML file called index in order to serve to users. Now that we have an index.html, we can start to write the container or the boilerplate that's required. So just like in the example from before, we need a doc type, and we're going to set that to HTML. Next, we need to add the HTML root element. So I can just write HTML, and VS Code has an autocomplete. So I can just simply hit enter now, and it'll create those tags. This is just a much more efficient way of writing code than having to do everything manually. So we now have the HTML root element, and within there, we're going to have a head tag, and we're also going to have a body tag. So head and body. You can see that the head and body tags are child elements of the HTML. So the HTML is the parent of the head and body. Inside of the head element, we're going to add a meta tag. Inside of the meta tag, we can add an attribute. Remember, an attribute is a modifier. So it's a way of giving the element some information. In this case, we're going to add charset, and we're going to set it to the value of UTF-8. So UTF-8 is an encoding which lets the browser know the types of characters and symbols that you're using. And UTF-8 covers all of the Latin characters, so A, B, C, D, and also all of the numbers, 1, 2, 3, and also all of the special characters, so percentage sign, hash, $sign, all of these. So this is all covered by UTF-8. Next, we'll add one more meta tag, and we're going to have an attribute in there called name, and we're going to set that equal to viewport. We're also going to have one more attribute called content, and we're going to set that equal to the width equal device width and initial scale equal 1.0. Originally, websites were made just for desktops. However, over the years, websites have been viewed on smartphones and tablets more and more. By adding the width is equal to device width, you're telling the browser that the width of the browser should equal the device's width at a scale of 1 to 1. This way, everything fits properly no matter what device you're viewing the website on. Side note, I know that this stuff is probably very foreign to you and seems a bit crazy, and it actually isn't stuff that you need to memorize, and it isn't something you'll be writing out every day, so don't be worried. We're just doing a full breakdown of HTML's boilerplate, and you should just be aware of the different pieces. Another meta tag to be aware of is one for SEO, or search engine optimization. So this would allow and help Google figure out what's on your web page and what the purpose of it is, and help with ranking. So we would create a meta tag, and we need to create an attribute called name and set it equal to keywords. And then similar to above, there's going to be a content attribute, and this is actually the keywords that you want Google to recognize. So for this, let's do HTML crash course. Next, we need a title for our web page. So let's create a title tag, and let's set it to HTML crash course. This title becomes the title in Google search, as well as the title in the browser tab. So the title here is HTML tutorial by W3 Schools, the tutorial, or the title, etc. Finally, we're going to change the favicon. So the favicon is the little icon that is to the left of the title in the browser tab. So these little symbols, little icons right up here. We can change that. To do that, I'm going to use a site called Find Icons, and I'm going to just go with this little emoticon smile. I'm going to download the PNG. And hope it's not a virus. And once it's downloaded, I'm just going to, on my other screen, I'm going to drag the smiley PNG. I'm going to drag it into the folder that the index.html is in. Now to set the icon, we're going to have to create a link element, And inside of there, we're going to have a rel equals to icon and an href, which is equal to the emoticon PNG itself. And it gives it gives a suggestion because the file is already within the folder. So we just simply click on emoticon smile.png, and now this is set. So when I save, notice that everything snaps into place. This is because of a plugin called Prettier, and I go over that in the VS Code video as well. So anytime I save, it's going to automatically snap everything into place. And like I said before, I'm using a VS Code extension called Live Server. So when I click on Go Live down here, it's going to create a local environment or a local server for me to be able to run my index.html file on there with auto reload or hot reload. So let's try that. Perfect. So as you can see at the very top, we've got a little smile icon and also the title. So HTML Crash Course. This comes from the title element that we created. This one right here. And like I said before, in the head is actually where you're going to reference your style sheets. So although we're not going to get into any CSS in this course, I just want to show you and make you aware of how it's written and where it would go. So similar to before, we create a link tag, and inside of there, we're going to have a rel that's equal to style sheet. And the href here, this is where you would actually set it to a file, a styles.css file. So styles.css is often the convention. And so this file would be here, and you would reference all of your styles. This is how you would style your web page and import that style. And that's it. We now have a skeleton template to write any HTML in. So any of our actual content would go here. Now, I wanted to write it out by hand first so that you could see what's what and really be familiar with it all. But there's a shortcut in VS Code. So if I were to delete everything and I typed out an exclamation mark, if I press enter now, it actually creates the skeleton for you. You'll still want to fill in the head tag with some missing metadata and link tags, but it'll get you up and running much faster. Again, I think it's important that you have written out the full HTML boilerplate by hand once or twice, and that you're familiar with the different components to it. But you aren't going to be writing this out very often, and it's good to know of this shortcut. Now that we've written out and understand the boilerplate for writing HTML, as well as looking at everything in the head tag, let's start looking at the different tags that can go within a body. You can see that I've changed things up a bit. So my code editor is going to take up 2/3 of the screen, and then the browser, which will show all the HTML, is going to take up the left side. The first tag we're going to look at is called an H1. And inside of it, we can have some title. And if I save this, you're going to see some title over here. And there's actually also H2s and H3s, and it goes all the way up to H6. So let's quickly check them out and see what they do. So H4 and H5 and H6. Perfect. And now let's just quickly put this in here and let's save. So you can see that H1 to H6, it actually gets smaller in size. An H1 will have greater importance over an H2 or an H3. It isn't just making the font size larger, it has semantic significance. So semantic means that an element clearly defines or describes its meaning to both the browser and to a developer that's reading it. For an example, an H1 will likely be the logo at the top of the website, and the H2 might be the title for the page, and the H3 might be the section headers. So they're just different levels of importance. Next, we're going to look at a p tag. So a p tag is a paragraph tag. So we can write a bunch of text here, and when we save, it's just going to appear. Next, we have the strong tag. So the strong tag will bold anything that's within it. So anything here will be bold. There's also a b tag, which also bolds anything within. And if I save that, you can also see that it's bold. The b tag used to be used, however, it's not semantic and it's not supported anymore. So if you see a b tag in code anywhere, know that it will bold the text, but also recognize that it should instead be a strong tag. Also take note how the h1 to h6, as well as the p tag, all have a line of their own. This is because they are block line elements. And the strong and the b tags, those are inline, so they're not going to take up the entire width and start a new line, but instead they will flow within the same line. And so because of this, we could write an inline element within a block level element, and it wouldn't disrupt the flow at all. So for example, I can write a strong, and remember this is inline, and I can put, let's say this text right here, I can put it within the strong tags, and when I save, the write a bunch is going to be bolded, but it never goes to the next line and it doesn't take up the whole width itself. This is because this part is inline and the rest of it is block. Similar to the strong tag, there's also the emphasis tag, or EM, and anything that goes within there will be italicized. So if I save that, you can see that this right here is italicized. There's also an I tag for italicized. So anything in here will be italicized as well. And when I save, you can see the exact same idea. And just like with strong and B, emphasis also has the I or italicized tag, and this one is deprecated and not supported anymore. So anytime you see an I tag, just realize, okay, yes, it's going to be italicized, but instead it should be EM. And also it should be noted that in web pages in general, we don't use these tags. We don't write a strong tag around something that we want to bold and an M tag around something we want to italicize. We would usually do that with CSS, but it's just important that you see all the different possibilities. Up next, we have a div tag. So think of divs as invisible wrapper elements that are used to divide up your content. They're super handy, but understand that there's no semantic significance to them, so they don't describe the meaning of the content as well as some other HTML elements may. So although you could write something here and it will show up, this write something here would probably be better suited for being within a p tag. A div would be great if I was wanting to have a container around some text and an image, and I wanted to sort of group those together. That's where I would use a div tag. Up next, we have comments. So adding a comment is pretty simple. You just do a less than, a exclamation mark, and 2 dashes. And VS Code is actually going to autocomplete and add the second half. But anything in here is a comment. So if I save, you'll see that it actually doesn't show. And the reason for that is because comments don't show in your web page. So you can use those for two primary reasons, two ways of using them. One is to describe your code a little bit. So we can say this is for divs and this is for text. And we can sort of have some descriptions of where we're at in the code, but we can also comment out some code. So if I have a paragraph tag with some random things and stuff inside of it, and I save, on the left you can see that it's there, But if I comment it out, so I can select it all and press Command and /, then it's going to comment it out, and if I save, then the commented out code disappears. So just a handy way of either commenting out some code or having a comment which can act as a reminder to let yourself or other developers know what a piece of code actually does. But use them sparingly. In general, your code should already be descriptive. Up next, we have HR, or horizontal ruler. So if you save that, you're going to get this line going straight across, and this acts as a separator between your content, but generally we'd use CSS to create this sort of separation. Of course, knowing that an HR exists is always great to have in your toolkit. Another self-closing tag is BR, or line break. So what a line break is going to do is make the content to the right of it go onto a new line. So if I save right now, you won't be able to see anything, but if I make a quick paragraph with some other things inside of it, then you can see that, obviously. And if I take this break and I put it right in the middle there, now what's going to happen is you can see with some other goes there, and then things inside goes on a new line. So it makes all the content which is after the break go onto a new line. Another super important self-closing tag is the image tag. So on the image tag, you're going to have two attributes which are super important. One is going to be called the source attribute, and the other is the alt attribute. So in the source is what image do you actually want the image tag to show. So this could either be a path to a photo that's on your computer, or you could go on to Google and find an image and right click and copy image address, and you just put it in there, and when I save, now we've got Dog. The alt attribute is for alternative text. So if the image is unable to load, then this text will show instead. So you can say photo of Doge, and this will help with screen readers and accessibility. Now I'm actually just going to add a width attribute of 100 pixels. I'm going to save that just to make the Doge a little smaller. We wouldn't usually control it with a width and height attribute, but now you know it exists, and it just makes it a little easier in our example here. Another super important element is the anchor tag, or the A tag. An A tag will be used to create a link to another web page, either on your site or to another site altogether. It's often used in nav bars. So if we just look at this example real quick, all of these are going to be A tags. So if I click on the about, it's going to redirect me to the about page. Ta-da! Similar to an image tag, an anchor tag has some essential attributes, namely the href. So href, or hypertext reference, allows you to specify the destination you want when someone clicks on it. So for example, we could put google.com in there, and you'll need the HTTPS in there as well. And if I click and I put it there and click me, if I go back, now we have a link, and if I click on it, you can see at the bottom here, it's going to go to Google, and yep, it went to Google. Another important attribute for the anchor tag is target. So you saw when I clicked on the link that we made, it just redirected straight to Google. But if I set the target to =_ and I save this, now when I click on this, it's going to open Google, but in another tab. So super important functionality to know about. Up next, we have button. So fairly simple. We can have a button and we'll say, view more. And if I save that, then we've got this view more button that does absolutely nothing. And there are a few different types of buttons, and you would specify it with the type attribute. So you can have a regular button, a reset, or a submit. I usually see submit and regular button. So we'll set it to button. Up until now, you've seen attributes that always have an attribute and a value given to it. However, there are some attributes which don't have values. For example, disabled. So if I save this, the button is disabled by default. I can't click on it. Next, we're going to have different types of inputs. So we can do an input, and an input will have a type attribute, just like the button above. And in this input, we have a whole bunch of different types. So button, checkbox, radio. These are all really great ones to know about. Let's start with just a regular text input. So if we save it like this, then we've got a little input to type whatever in. We can also add a placeholder attribute. And what this does is it will add a, you guessed it, a placeholder when there is no text in it. So if I wanted to have an input and I'm basically asking for the first name here, then I can type in Paxton. And just like the button having a disabled attribute, you can also add the disabled attribute on inputs. And so what this will do is completely gray out the input and not allow me to type anything into it. Similar to input, we also have something called the text area. So a text area is, you guessed it, an area that you could just write all types of things in. Nope, here. So this is for longer bits of text where you need to get a bit more information from the user. And just like the input, we have placeholder attribute, which we can say, write a story. And if I add that, then the write a story is there by default. And as soon as I write something, then the placeholder disappears. And of course, there's also a disabled attribute. So if you don't want the person to be able to access it, then there's always that attribute. Up next, we have lists. So there are two different types of lists in HTML. There are ordered lists and unordered lists. So an ordered list will have OL as the parent element, and then you're going to have LI or list item in it. So list item 1, and let's just duplicate that down. Let's say 3 and 2. And there you go. You can see list item 1, 2, 3. So you could create lists based on this. There's also a type here. And with this, it doesn't have to be 1, 2, 3. It could also be letters or Roman numerals. So let's say we want lowercase a. And if I save that, now you can see down here, A, B, C. With unordered lists, UL, we start that as the parent, and then we have list items, just like above. And in there, we can have bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3, let's say. And if I save that, now we're going to have a bullet list, a bullet point list. Sometimes on web pages, we'll need to make tables. So thankfully, there are tables available. So to do this, we first start by doing a table element. And within there, we could have, let's say, a caption, which is essentially the title for the table. So let's say purchases. And just like with the HTML boilerplate, there's a head and a body. So the T head or the table head will have a TR or a table row, which is that first row at the very top. And within there, you're going to have TH, which is table header. So we can have name and let's say item and cost. And then under the head, there's going to be a body, so T body. And just like before, there's going to have to be a row, so TR. And then within there, you're going to do TD for table data. And they'll have, let's say, Jill and an apple and 5 for the cost. So each of these is going to correspond with one another. So the name, Jill, item, apple, cost, 5, etc. So if we wanted to add another list, we'd also have to do another tr for a whole other row. And in there, we can have, again, you guessed it, td for table data. We can have Bob, we can have orange, and we can have $4 for an orange. It's fairly pricey, but you know, it's fine. And you can see at the bottom left here, we now have this little table. Now up next, we have forms. So on a website, we're often going to have lots of types of forms, whether it's getting someone's email address for a newsletter or a contact form. There's very often forms. So to create that, I'm just going to add a comment to keep things a bit more organized. We're going to do a form tag. And in the form, there is an action attribute. And the value for this action is actually where the form data is going to be sent. So let's say some file name .php. So this would be a backend file, something on the server that would collect all the information that's being sent from this form. And we can have a method attribute as well. And we can set that to post, which means to send. If it's a get, then that would be to receive. So post. Now within a form, we can have a whole bunch of different inputs and text areas and checkboxes and drop-down menus and all sorts of things. So let's explore that. So I'm going to wrap all the different sections of this form in div tags just to keep things organized. So we can have a label with a for of, let's say, fname, and I'll explain this in a second. And we can say first name, and then with that label, we can have an input of type text, and we can have a name equal to first name and an ID equal to fname. So when it comes to labels and inputs, the for and the ID need to match. And so that's why fname is written right here. The for and the ID link together in the DOM, or the document object model, which helps for accessibility again, or screen readers. And the name attribute here is for the server to identify the input in case it needs to extract the value of the input directly. So the server could access the value that's put into this through looking at an input that has a name of first name. And from there, it could extract the text that is typed within it. So let's save and see where we're at. Perfect. I'm going to actually put an HR right here with a BR right above it, below it rather. And now we can see things a little clearer. So let's say that we wanted a last name input now. Same idea, we can do a div and a label with the for of lname for last name, let's say, and last name. And we can have an input with type equal text and a name that's equal to last name. And of course, an ID that is equal to lname, since the ID needs to match the for. If we save that, now we've got a last name. So we can do Paxton, whatever. Next, we could explore radio buttons. So let's try a div, and inside of there, we're going to do an input, and the type is going to be equal to radio. I'll show you what this looks like in just a second. And let's set a name equal to gender and a value equal to male. And outside of that, you could have either a label for this, or we could just write, male right here. And let's copy that and put another one right underneath. And we'll set the value of this to female. Now, when I save this, we're now going to have an option for male or female. And notice that it can only be one or the other. And that is because the name attribute here is set to gender. So if I misspelled one and I spelled it differently, let's say this one is gender, and I save that, now it's actually, they're not linked together anymore. So I could click on male and I could click on female. So we're going to go back and we're just going to send it back to gender. For radio buttons, there is another attribute called checked. So if I wanted to have the male checkbox checked by default, then I could put the checked attribute in it. Up next, we have drop-down menus. So let's say a div with a label that's equal to cars. And inside we can say favorite car. And we can have a select with a name of car select and an ID of cars. And within the select, we can have an option tag with the value of, let's say, a Jag for a Jaguar car. And then let's create a couple others. So we need an Audi and a Lambo for Lamborghini. And if I save this, now we're going to have a drop-down menu. So if I click on this, I can select whatever I want, Lamborghini, whatever. And also within the form, we could have, our favorite types of food represented with checkboxes. So we can have a div that contains an input with the type equal to checkbox, and let's say a name that's equal to checkboxes, and an ID equal to pizza for the label, of course. And then underneath, we'll have a label with the for attribute equal to the ID, so pizza. And in there, let's say pizza. And if I save that, now I have a little pizza checkbox. I like pizza, it's excellent. And let's just copy and paste that, and we'll say sushi and sushi. So I can have pizza or sushi. So once somebody types in their first name, last name, their gender, favorite car, and their favorite food, then of course you need to submit the form. So to do that, we have a button, and in there we're going to add a type attribute, and we're going to set it to submit. And we can add the text submit. If I save that, then now we have a submit button. And if I were to click on this submit, you'll see that it's actually going to redirect to somefilename.php, which is the value that we put inside of the action attribute at the very top of the form. So we can see it working in action. Now, I know that I said that there would be no CSS in this video, but it's important that you know this attribute exists. So that is the style attribute. So if I wanted to add some styling, I could do color is equal to red, and the background color of the button, this is equal to blue. And if I save this, now we have this hideous submit button. So in CSS, we don't use this style attribute. This is called inline styling, and this is a big no-no. So let's delete that and save again. And now we're back to this default button. And the way that you would add CSS is through either a class attribute or an ID attribute. And we'll go over both of these in the next video where I'm going to do a crash course on CSS. And finally, we have a few tags that are related to semantic significance that I had spoken about earlier in this video. So they don't do anything on screen, but they just help with properly defining your content and helping with readability. So those are, I'm going to just separate it here, and we'll call this sections. So we have the header, we have the nav, we have section, and finally we have footer. So if I save right now, it's not going to do anything on the left, so there's nothing that actually appears. However, this is just a way for you to actually structure your code and help with readability. I'm going to go back to that website that I had up before just to show you some examples. So the header is for the top section of your website, and it will often contain a logo image and also the nav bar. So the header is going to be this whole top part right at the very top here. And then within that, you'll have the nav. Nav is for navigation bars or nav bars. It's going to contain all of the links, all of the navigation links. So it's going to be this section right at the top here. So home and about and contact pages. All of that would usually be put within the nav element. Next, you have section. So you'd use a section tag to break up the different parts of your web page by grouping together thematically related content so that for anyone reading your code, you can clearly split where the end of one section ends and where another one begins. So it's basically a container for a different section. And then you would have smaller containers like a div, let's say, to wrap around this smaller section here. So a section could be from here to here. So this would be one section. And then this would also be another section right here. And then you could have a featured collections section, etc. And here's testimonials section. So again, it's just a way of grouping your content. And finally, we have the footer, which is used at the bottom or the last section of the web page. So this would be the footer here, right at the bottom, all of this. So today we explored that HTML is the content of a website. It is made up of different HTML tags. These tags can have attributes, and these attributes provide different functionality or information to the tags. We also looked at inline versus block level elements and the different ways that they work. We looked at the boilerplate template that's required to write HTML code. We looked at a whole bunch of different HTML elements and what they do. And we also looked at how to structure your page with nav, section, footer, etc. And that is a wrap. You should now have a pretty solid understanding of HTML and ready to start learning CSS, or the styling of a web page. In my opinion, this is where things get really fun. If you have any questions at all, feel free to drop them in the comments down below, and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible. If you found this video helpful, consider dropping a like or sharing it with a friend, as it really helps this channel out. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.